Hello ladies and gentlemen, once again this is Jeremy Smith. As many of you guys know, I can be a little bit of a full frame snob at times. If you guys are curious about exactly why, I do have a video where I compared crop sensor cameras versus full frame. Yes, I know it's old, yes I know it needs an update, and it's something we'll talk about in future videos again later. But the fact of the matter is, guys, I totally get it. Not everybody wants to buy a camera that's $2,000 or $3,000 or more. And so I'm very intrigued by the latest crop of crop sensor cameras on the market. Get what I did there? Anyways. And one of the cameras I looked at recently was Canon's new R10. And during that video, I spoke about the R7. Now, we didn't get a chance to look at the R7 that day because, frankly, the R7s were very hard to get. But I have seen more and more questions about the R7, even people just commenting on my R10 video, and they've asked me about the R7 a lot, so I decided we'd go ahead and take a look at the R7 and give you guys a little bit of an idea of why you'd want to go up to the R7 from the R10. Definitely check out my R10 video too if you're more curious about that camera. But anyways, we're going to go ahead and get into this. I will go ahead and say, guys, that if you're interested in buying either of these cameras, definitely check out the links in the description below. Bedford Camera and Video is kind enough to continue to let me borrow cameras to bring you guys videos about them, so definitely check out the links below. And if you end up purchasing something, definitely use the affiliate code TheGreat at checkout. It's greatly appreciated and it helps out this channel. But anyways, guys, let's go ahead and jump into this and take a closer look at the Canon R7. Taking a closer look at the Canon R7, a few of the differences between this and the R10 are going to be immediately obvious on the spec sheet. This camera does have a 32.5 megapixel sensor versus the 24 megapixel sensor found in the R10. Now that's going to be very useful if you're going to do something like birds or wildlife, where having that extra reach could be good. If you can't quite get close enough to the action, you can always have that extra resolution to help you crop and still maintain image quality. Also, despite this camera having the exact same video specs at first glance, it's important to know that if you care about shooting 4K 60 footage, the R7 doesn't have any additional crop factor in 4K 60, whereas the R10 does. Now, later on in a future video, we are going to do more image quality testing because I've also heard many people talk about how the R10 footage in 4K is not the greatest, but perhaps in a future video we'll find out how they compare. But if we continue our physical differences between these cameras, another reason why you might go with this camera over something like the R10 is just simply because of its size and shape. So yeah, I don't have really super huge hands, but yeah, even this camera for my hands feels better than the R10. You have a much deeper grip here. You can see how I'm able to get all my fingers on here, so it's very, very nice. Another thing I like about this camera is that they've continued this new style of on-off switch on this one as well. So now Canon, they actually have their on-off switch placed over on the right-hand side of the camera. You can also toggle into video mode pretty easily just by going in and moving the on-off switch to this position. So now we're doing video. So that's pretty sweet. We also have some other things on this one, just like we saw on the R10. We have our ISO button up here as well. We have our very familiar multifunction button, and we even see Canon's new advanced hot shoe. This allows us to do things like plug in additional equipment, like say for example a microphone, or perhaps even a audio interface. So Canon, they're giving us that intelligent hot shoe design now. So pretty cool design there. Okay, so another few other little differences on this camera versus the R10. This camera actually does have a higher resolution viewfinder. I've given up remembering all these numbers these days, but I'll put something on screen for you guys to know. But this camera does have a much better LCD screen. Now, the one thing that I was very, very confused by on this camera initially is just the layout of the dial. You guys know how Canon, they love their rear wheel. It's usually placed down here, like it is on cameras like the R6 Mark II or R5 or R3. But on this camera, it's a little different. The dial is actually up here. So it's kind of interesting. The R10 has a dial up here as well, but it's not in this design where it's around the focus joystick. I'm going to have to use this camera a bit more and tell you guys what I think about this, but it honestly looks a bit strange, but so far I've felt pretty comfortable using it. So you guys can see it's usual Canon flavor where your rear dial here does the aperture, front dial does the shutter speed. So pretty easy setup. We also have the AF on button. Now, one other thing that I noticed on this camera versus all the other Canons, this is the first Canon that I can tell from my memory that came out of the box where you can actually change the focus point just using the joystick. So you don't have to press that focus button first. You can just come up here straight away and start moving the joystick. And this is something that's normally accessed in a custom function on cameras like the R6 and the R5 and R3 and pretty much every Canon before it. But it's nice having that ability out of the box. Now I don't have to spend all my time with Canon customers saying, hey guys, let me show you how to just move this around and not have to press the button first by changing this custom function. So kudos to Canon for making that the default behavior. Over here on this side of the camera, we do have two UHS-II style card slots. Now on the R10, I spoke about how it's very important to use something like a fast V90 class memory card. And on this camera right here, you actually, I would actually say that it's even more important just because on this camera, we basically have higher resolution files. So now we have higher resolution files to send to the card. This camera does the same exact 15 frame a second burst in the mechanical shutter mode. However, it increases to 30 frames per second whenever you are in the electronic shooting mode. And that is a good increase over the R10. The R10 did 23 frames per second. So definitely everything I said about using a fast card on the R10 really applies to, it applies twice to the R7. This camera does have a much better buffer. This is another area where if you are doing a lot of action photography, I already spoke about how it's nice to have extra resolution as well as the 4K 60 with no crop. But if you're going to go and do some action photography, that's another reason to go up to the R10, because while the speeds are very similar, this camera has about twice the buffer of the R10. And that is a really big difference, okay? So I'm going to just show you this. This camera can do about 40 frames or so in the buffer before it actually has to slow down when you're using the electronic shutter. It'll do about 50 frames if you're in the mechanical shutter. So we're going to go in here. I'll go ahead and put it onto our continuous high plus, just like this. And yeah, if you guys remember my R10 video, this camera does way better. I may just go ahead and put that part of my R10 video there for you guys to see. I was impressed too that even in RAW, you can see it still does pretty well. And then it finally slowed down. But you can see how bang, that card has already saved the data. So this camera does pretty respectable. But yeah, if you really want to use that 23 frame a second burst rate, if you want to shoot really fast on electronic, that's still where this camera's big brother, the R7, will work out better for you. But yeah, if you're going to do anything that involves action or sports, definitely go R7 because it's going to do much better buffer-wise. So kind of keep that in mind. To show you guys the electronic shutter here, we go into our shooting mode, and there is an option in here that will allow us to go in and change that. So let's see here. We have to go in and turn the silent shutter. We can turn that on, or you can just go down here and switch this over to electronic. And now you guys will notice. Now, you guys may have noticed that little disclaimer that came up. It actually warns us that fast-moving subjects may look distorted, and it cannot be used for flash photography. And of course, it distorts fast-moving subjects just because we don't have that stack sensor. So yeah, that takes us to basically the Canon R3 if we want that feature in Canon. But still very useful. So let's just see here. If we go in like this. Wow. So yeah. Yeah, so it's about 50 or so frames before the camera feels its buffer there. So it goes by very quickly, as you guys can see. So that's how that works out. A couple other things that are nice to know that I did not realize about this camera. You do have a little bit of a difference with your flash photography. If you're the type of photographer that's going to be doing any type of flash photography outside and you want to blend in ambient light, this camera does actually sync its flash at up to 1/320th of a second, which is a nice bump up. It's about a third of a stop, or it is the third of a stop increase over the 1/250th of a second that's found on the R10. If we take a look at the side of the camera here, it's basically just like the R10. I'm not going to dwell on this too much. You've got your same remote jack. It's like the same one that's been used by Canon for many years now. We have a microphone jack here as well. We also, on this one though, are adding a headphone jack. So if you want to be able to monitor your sound when you're filming, this camera does give us access to the headphone jack, which is really, really nice. And over here, frankly, there's a little bit of a disappointment. Oh, Canon, why do you keep doing this to me? I don't really fault the R10 as much for this because it's an entry-level camera. But now with this R7, we're moving up the line. But I'm very, very sad to see that this is still a micro HDMI port. I'm not going to go on a rant about this, but Canon, video makers, we hate this. Please stop doing this in the future. Below here we have our USB-C connector, so that's a nice saving grace. It's nice that all the cameras, for the most part, are using USB-C these days, so we don't have to carry around tons of USB cables. So that's a very nice thing as well. If you are a beginner photographer, and maybe you need one of the features I just described, maybe you want to have that 4K 60 with no crop, maybe you want to have faster burst shooting to photograph your kids' sports, things like that, don't be intimidated by this camera, because just like the R10, it still has the exact same scene modes. So you can put this over on the scene setting, and you can go in here and start shooting no problem whatsoever. Like you can go in here, you've got all these popular modes. You have things like your portrait mode. You have your landscape mode. Basically, the camera is going to automatically set itself to pick some manual settings that are going to be more appropriate for that type of photography. So if you have no idea about shutter speed or aperture or anything, and you want to do sports, action photography, you can come in here, you can put it on the sports mode, hit OK. It's automatically going to set itself up for that sort of thing. So now you can see it's automatically in a burst, it's automatically going to track the subject. So just kind of keep that in mind. If you're just starting out, don't be afraid to go up to this camera. It's no harder to use than the R10 is, but as time goes on, you will have a lot more flexibility and a lot more features with this one. Something else I'll mention too, that I did not mention at the top of this video, is that this camera also has in-body stabilization. So that's also a very, very nice thing, especially if you're going to be using prime lenses that don't have stabilization oftentimes. You will get much better ability to handhold longer shutter speeds. And on Canon, if you want to get even better performance with lenses that do have IBIS built in, you do have the in-body stabilization working with that lens-based IBIS. Something else I want to show you guys is that over here we have an autofocus and manual focus switch. And for a while I thought, man, why does Canon have this switch? They don't have this on the R6, the R5, the R3. Why do we have it on the R10 and on the R7? And I think it's because of the user they think is going to be using this camera. Now, I do have this high-end 24-70 L series lens on here now, and you guys can see it does have an AF and manual focus switch here. And then we have three rings. We have a zoom ring, we have a focus ring, and then we have this control ring right here. Now, I'm sure a lot of photographers, I'm sure a few photographers are going to be using a higher-end lens like this on the R7, but I don't think it's going to be the norm. I think that most people buying this camera are going to be using some of Canon's mid-range lenses. Lenses like Canon's RF 16mm 2.8 come to mind, and those lenses just have one ring. They don't have a dedicated control ring. So the only switch they have on them is a switch to change the ring function. You can set the ring to be your focus, or you can set the ring to be your control ring. And on those lenses, there's no manual focus autofocus switch. So I think that's why Canon has gone and put this autofocus manual focus switch on the body, because they figure a lot of the users using this camera will not have a lens that has the switch on it. Another thing that I almost forgot to mention is that the R7 has much better battery life. And that's because the R7 has the larger LPE6NH battery that's found in cameras like the R5 and the R6 and R6 Mark II. So basically on this one, you can expect it's rated up to 770 shots when you're using the LCD, or 500 shots when you're using the EVF, compared to 430 and 260 on the R10. So much better battery life indeed. So anyways, well guys, that was just kind of like my quick initial thoughts on this camera. I definitely plan to do a little bit more testing, especially if you guys write me in the comments. If there's image quality questions you have, I'd love to take this camera and the R10 and do some comparisons. I'm especially eager to see how this camera compares in video mode to the R10, because a lot of people are saying that the R10 video 4K is not the sharpest, so I definitely want to see about that. But yes, write me in the comments below and let me know what else you'd like to see. And of course, yes guys, I apologize. I got a bit busy lately, but I have been around and I'm still looking at the comments, and I will reply to you if you have questions. So definitely write me in the questions below. And once again, I'd like to thank Bedford Camera and Video for allowing me to borrow cameras to show you guys. So if you guys would like to purchase a camera, going to their website, which is bedfords.com, and then checking out with my affiliate code, which is the great, that definitely helps out this channel and helps me bring you more content on more cameras. Also, obviously you want to be sure to subscribe to the channel and give this video a thumbs up if you like it. Until next time, this is Jeremy Smith, signing off. It's crazy, every frame of this is 30 some odd megapixels, 32.5 or something like that. Yeah. Looks pretty good. I think this will probably work. I'm feeling the blue. Ah yes, I've gone all dark side today. Join me. Come to the dark side, we have cookies.